It actually worked. You reach your safe house without being trailed or even noticed. You had to stop a few times along the way down dark alleys or on rooftops to unfurl the portable hole just long enough for some air to enter it so that your captive does not suffocate. Your safe house is such a well-guarded secret that not even your closest friends or allies know of its existence. You set it up a long time ago just in case you ever needed to vanish for a while. In the basement, you set up a special cage. This cage is made out of anti-magic alloy. Inside, a magic nullifying field. No magic can escape it, and no scrying spells can be used to peer inside of it. It's a nifty little thing if you need to vanish, and it's gonna come in really handy with this individual, now your captive. You open the door. You throw the portable hole in and slam it shut. Immediately, with a hum, the magical nullifying field activates. The portable hole ceases to work and spits out your captive. Immediately, they stand up and summon all their magical might in order to obliterate you with one single spell. But their magic fizzles out. You see shock, anger, and frustration wash over their face as they scan you up and down. You swear you see a glimmer of recognition in their eyes. There aren't a lot of tabaxi in this part of the world. There weren't a lot of tabaxi in Bramberg, and sure as heck there are a lot fewer now that he's done with them. The atrocities he committed are unspeakable. You could give in to the temptation and be judge, jury, and executioner tonight. But it's better that you resist. It's better that you hold back. Take them back to Bramberg so that they can face trial and get what's coming to them. It would be such a sweet moment to end this individual's life, but if you gave in to your temptation, you wouldn't be better than he is. No. You're gonna meet up with your companions and hatch a plan as to how to smuggle him back to Bramberg and bring him before judges. You blow out the few candles lighting the basement and you make your way back up to the main floor, making sure that all doors are bolted behind you. Welcome to today's episode. Hello everyone and welcome to Funky Monkey MP, the place where you get your weekly dose of miniature painting, history and world building. On today's episode we'll be continuing our discussion on spices and delve into the spice wars. No, not those spice wars, although these spice wars are inspired in the real world spice wars of the Middle Ages in the Age of Discovery. Before we jump into it, let us talk about the miniature. This miniature is a custom-made mini. It is the miniature of one of my players. I really think it's a cool miniature and we're gonna have a lot of fun painting it today. With that out of the way, let us begin. I strongly believe that it is very important we understand how most of the spices we take for granted today came to Europe and became available worldwide throughout history. Most of the condiments and spices hide a very dark past, but two of them stand out head and shoulders above everything else. These two are nutmeg and cloves. Unfortunately, one of the greatest eras in human history, the Age of Exploration, came to be also known as one of the darkest periods in human history, at least in my opinion. If you haven't watched my previous video, please make sure you do so before watching this video, as it sets the stage for what is to be discussed today. It explains how things were set in motion thousands of years before the events we are going to discuss today. And it explains why things happened as they did. And with that, let us talk about nutmeg. But before we do so, let's take a first look at the miniature. To be honest, in this miniature's case I am focusing on two main parts, the face with a cigar and all, and the weaponry, with the equipment only playing a support role, making the face draw all the attention, closely followed by the weapons. I am now using Altorf Guard Blue as the base coat for Egrog's skin, and a very thin coat of non-oil to deepen the shadows on the face, especially around the eyes. Welcome back. With me I have both of my assistants, as you can see, and one of them is quite hungry, but I think we can manage for a bit. Oh, there she goes. Let us continue. After Vasco da Gama reached the shores of India in 1497, all of the major Western European countries followed suit, going around Africa and trading directly with India without the Ottoman or the Arab middlemen. This was quite a considerable hit against the Ottoman Empire and created some financial issues for the empire. But the moment profits start rolling in, these superpowers began focusing on something else. With the economy booming, they turned their attention to colonialism and the creation of corporations. As such, in the 1600s, the British East India Company came into being. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company, also known as the VOC, came into being. Portugal follows suit in 1628, France in 1674, and Sweden in 1731. These corporations were given quite significant powers. We'll talk mostly about the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. They were given the power to negotiate with local chiefs, they were given the power to negotiate treaties, they were given the power to construct and hold forts, they were given the power to have armies, a private army, and they were given the power to assign judges and pass judgment in the foreign territories. This was massive because, as you might expect, this led to some horrific results. With the company created, all of the major port cities in the Netherlands had an office of this corporation. They all had to sponsor their own expeditions, they all had to build their own ships and provide their own crew. But upon return to the Netherlands, all of the cities would receive a share of the profits. This encouraged more and more ships to be built. This encouraged more and more territories to be investigated, explored, and exploited. This also led to a race between the Netherlands and the British Isles in a search for something that the Europeans coveted for the past millennia, a secret very well guarded by both Asian merchants and Arab merchants: the source of nutmeg. In 1599, after spending tremendous sums of money, mostly on local guides, the Dutch managed to find the source of nutmeg, the Banda Archipelago, 10 volcanic isles that are the sole source of nutmeg across the world. Immediately, of course, they started conquering territories one by one. After the birth of the VOC in 602, the Dutch switched tactic. They realized that it wouldn't be that profitable to negotiate with all of the natives and all of the local chieftains. They realized that it would be easier to conquer, enslave, and exploit these new territories rather than having to go through the locals. In 1608, the VOC was ordered to ensure monopoly over nutmeg trade and make sure that no other power, be it Asian or European, had any holds that yielded nutmeg. In 1612, a negotiation is carried out between the British and the Dutch in London, but to no avail. In 1615, yet another attempt at reaching a treaty is made in Brussels, again to no avail. From that moment onward, the British will be forcibly pushed out of the archipelago and out of most of Indonesia. Open war was started between the two superpowers. While the Dutch were busy entrenching themselves onto the islands and trying to transform all of the islands into large nutmeg farms, a British captain by the name of Nathaniel Courthope manages to establish a foothold on the last island that yielded nutmeg that the Dutch did not conquer. It was a small island, only 2 miles by half a mile, the island of Run. Upon hearing the news, King James was so happy that he added a new name to his title, thus becoming James of England, Scotland, Ireland, and Run. For 4 years, the Dutch tried to eliminate Courthope. For 4 years, they hunted for him. And after 4 years, they managed to catch up with him, ambush, and kill him. This was a very grave blow to the British, especially because Run was their first colony ever. It took them quite a long while to get back at the Dutch, but we'll discuss this later. Before we continue with our story, let's take a moment and appreciate this magnificent little miniature. After finishing the leather jerkin and coating it in nuln oil, I turned my attention to the rest of the equipment, the pants, the backpack and the bedroll. Once I was happy with the result, I turned my full focus on one of the most important parts of the miniature, the weaponry. After previously applying an Incubi Darkness base coat to the bow and to the blade itself, I had to go back to it as I forgot to paint the hilt of the sword. Once that step was done, I used very well thinned down Calgar blue to start detailing the sword. Let us continue. After the VOC was ordered to ensure monopoly over the nutmeg trade, there was a moment where the population in Jakarta revolted against the Dutch overlords. They tried to assault the Dutch fort in Jakarta, but they failed because they did not have weapons, as the Dutch did. The revolt was crushed, the city was razed, and a new city was constructed on the ruins of the old, called Batavia. The Batavians are an ancient people that inhabited parts of what we nowadays call the Netherlands. In 69 CE, they revolted against the Roman rule and managed to defeat several Roman units. In response, Emperor Nero sent several legions against them, and we don't actually know what happened because the only surviving source, the works of Tacitus, end abruptly when it comes to telling us what the outcome is. What we do know is that the two opposing forces, the Roman legions and the rebels, met on a battlefield and started negotiation talks. Now we don't know the outcome, but we do know that the Batavians are mentioned throughout Roman history well into the 4th century CE. Now, I truly don't understand how the hypocrisy and the irony escaped the Dutch, seeing how the Batavian revolts are a point of pride in their history, and they decided to name their new city Batavia in honor of their ancestors who revolted against oppression. Now, that is truly intriguing to me, to say the least. But apparently it did get past them. In 1607, a new governor is named for the archipelago, Jan Petersen Cohen. This governor is hailed as a hero in the Netherlands, while in Indonesia he is the embodiment of evil. He is a mass murderer. I'll explain. After he is named, his approach was a brutal one. He punished every proof of insubordination. He punished every act of defiance. And in 1621, he employed Japanese mercenaries, rounded up all 44 local chieftains, and publicly executed them, having their bodies impaled and displayed in public places as a warning for those who would be insubordinate, who would rebel against the Dutch overlords. He then started a brutal campaign of pacifying the population. Out of 15,000 locals, only 1,000 survived this pacification. The isles were repopulated with slaves brought from Java. This is an outright genocide. And of course, the locals would consider this individual as being the embodiment of evil. Moreover, to humiliate the locals and to remind them of their place, he reduced their army to 5 individuals. Not 500, not 5,000, but 5. By 1684, almost the whole archipelago was under Dutch control, with only a few territories being under the control of other major powers. At one point, nutmeg saplings were smuggled off the isles and planted in India and the Caribbean, where they took root, and slowly, over decades and hundreds of years, the price of nutmeg and the monopoly that the Dutch held over the nutmeg trade started to decline. But it was already done. The places, the people, everything was changed. The hold that the Dutch had over the archipelago came to an end during World War II, when the Japanese occupied most of the isles. And then in 1945, the isles declared their independence. After 4 long years of international pressure, the Dutch finally recognized the independence of their colony in Indonesia. And with that, we wrap up today's episode and continue next week with what the British did alongside the Spaniards and the French, while the Dutch were massacring people in Indonesia. If you found today's episode informative, make sure you hit that like button, as it helps out the channel tremendously. And if you haven't already, and I managed to convince you, hit that subscribe button. With that, thank you so much for the privilege of your time. I truly hope you learned something new today. I hope I see you all here next week on Funky Monkey MP. Have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day. Cheers.